Hey guys, tonight we're going to spend a few quiet, candlelit hours with one of the most powerful, feared, and by the end, physically collapsing men in European history, King Henry VIII. You're entering his world in 1546, just months before the end, when the palace stinks of rosewater and rot, and the king's legs are so ulcerated they have their own attendants. His mind? Foggy from pain, haunted by ghosts, and increasingly convinced that everyone is plotting against him. And you lucky sleeper, are here to tiptoe through his perfumed chambers while the monarchy quietly prepares for the worst. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing how far and wide this sleepy little history club stretches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're ushered into Whitehall Palace just after dusk. The winter sky presses down, thick and gray, and the Thames outside murmurs with the sluggish certainty of old water. Inside, the air is heavier. Layers of velvet, wood smoke, and something else. Sweet and sickly. Someone's trying to mask it with sandalwood incense. It's not working. Behind a set of ornate doors, the king lies in a custom-built four-poster bed, roughly the size of a ship's hull. He hasn't stood unaided in months. His legs are wrapped in bandages that need changing multiple times a day. One account whispers that the wounds wept and hissed. Lovely. You take a seat on the far side of the room, near the fireplace where no one notices you. The courtiers move like shadows, barely speaking. The king is, technically, still conscious. His massive frame shifts against a mound of cushions, and his breath rattles, wet and shallow. But his eyes are closed, sunk deep into swollen lids. This is the King of England. At his peak, Henry VIII was the embodiment of strength and Renaissance ambition. Scholar, athlete, composer, tyrant. But now, he's 55, obese, likely diabetic, with a heart working overtime and a mind steeped in paranoia. He weighs over 400 pounds, and the combination of old jousting injuries and years of unchecked gout means his legs are essentially open wounds. Historians still argue whether his health was worsened by diabetes, Cushing's syndrome, or a host of nasty infections. But consensus agrees on one thing. It wasn't pretty. And yet he clings to ceremony. His bedchamber is a theater. There are embroidered canopies, golden candle holders, attendants in perfectly maintained livery, and naturally a small army of physicians pretending things are under control. Occasionally the king mutters in his sleep. Names, commands, sometimes something about a falcon. One of the doctors, probably the least nervous looking, leans in with a small pot of rose ointment and dabs gently at the king's ankle. The smell is pungent. A blend of rotting flesh and overripe potpourri. Another attendant, armed with a silver bowl and a feather fan, clears his throat and asks if they should begin the prayers. No one responds. They're waiting for a sign from the king's closest advisor, Sir Anthony Denny. Denny nods, almost imperceptibly. The prayers begin. You glance up and see that one of the carved cherubs on the wall has a tiny crack running through its eye. Fitting. As the candles flicker, you realize something else. The king's chambers aren't just dark, they're eerily quiet, almost too quiet. The courtiers speak in whispers. The food arrives tepid. No music, no laughter. The very walls seem to be holding their breath. This is the hush before a monarch's death. And despite all the perfumes, all the pomp, all the rehearsed gestures, no one seems to know exactly what to do. After all, this is Henry, the man who beheaded wives, broke with Rome, rewrote religious law on a whim, and declared himself supreme head of the Church of England. He's not supposed to die like this, in bed, dribbling into his beard, surrounded by fearful murmurs and flickering shadows. But that's exactly what's happening. A page, maybe 13 years old, pale as parchment, brings in a fresh linen towel. He holds it like it might bite him. The physician thanks him with a nod and begins rewrapping the king's leg. You notice that his hands tremble. Not from age, from fear. Apparently, being the royal doctor is less prestige and more high-stakes guesswork. Outside, a dog howls. You think for a moment it might be staged. Everything here is, but no, that's real. Somewhere near the gardens, an old hunting hound cries into the fog. The king stirs. Everyone freezes. And then, as quickly as it came, the moment passes. He exhales and falls still again. This is going to be a long night. A new day seeps into Whitehall, not with sun, but with drizzle. Gray upon gray. Somewhere down the hall, a window creaks open and the scent of rain tries, in vain, to dilute the sickly air. Inside the chamber, nothing has changed, and yet everything has. You open your eyes. Figuratively, of course, you never really sleep here. And Henry is awake. Sort of. His eyes are open but glassy, and he's reaching for something that isn't there. His lips move soundlessly at first, then with a mumble. Wine. Bring the wine. Servants spring into action. A gold-rimmed goblet is lifted, inspected, sniffed, refilled. They do this ritual every time with the urgency of people who know that a misplaced sip could end their careers. Or their lives. You watch as the drink is brought forward. Claret, rich and heavy. Henry gulps it down like a man dying of thirst, not like one who's already drowning from within. Wine dribbles from the corner of his mouth, staining his beard. He doesn't seem to notice. Or care. And then, meat. Of course. Because even as the ulcers ooze and the fevers spike, the man still demands whole roasted birds, honeyed hams, and beef marinated in red wine and spices. It's grotesquely impressive. This man is essentially falling apart, yet his appetite remains imperial. The servants bless them, pretend it's normal. They carve and arrange and serve like this is any other Tuesday. He chews noisily. You hear every bite. And then he stops. The chewing halts mid-motion. His eyes flick toward the far corner of the room. Your corner. But he's not looking at you. He's looking past you. At something or someone no one else seems to see. A pause. His lips twitch. He whispers a name. Anne Boleyn, second wife, beheaded in 1536. You remember, you shift a little, involuntarily. The air feels colder now. The king doesn't move. He's staring, utterly fixated, as if expecting Anne to step forward out of the wood grain. Historians still argue whether Henry's ghost sightings in his final months were fevered hallucinations, guilty projections, or cleverly whispered rumors invented by those angling for influence. But one thing's consistent in all the records. He spoke to people who weren't there, often, and always at night. You wonder which version of Anne he sees? The playful, clever courtier who once danced in French silks? Or the executioner's victim, holding her head in her hands? Either way, the king seems shaken. He grabs for another goblet. This time, it's mulled. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and a splash of whatever potion the court physician insists will strengthen the humours. They could have served sawdust for all the good it does. Henry drinks, then slumps. And finally, he speaks with clarity. The dead are loud, he rasps, then softer. They don't forgive. No one responds. They've heard worse. Later that evening, as the king drifts in and out of a food-stuffed stupor, the nightmares begin again. The groans are low at first, then grow louder, gruffer. You hear him muttering battle cries, shouting names, issuing orders. For a moment, he sounds like his younger self again. The warrior king at the siege of Boulogne. The one who charged into battle with banners flying. But then, the screams twist. The war cries melt into pleas. The names change. Jane, Anne, Thomas More, Catherine, Cromwell. It's like an entire cast of ghosts has lined up to visit. The servants have stopped reacting. This is routine now. In one of the darker corners of the room, a servant lights a sprig of dried lavender, hoping to clear the smell. Doesn't help. The rain intensifies, drumming against the windows in steady rhythm, almost like a dirge. Outside, the river glimmers with dull moonlight. Inside, the king moans in his sleep and flails his arm, knocking over a tray. No one picks it up. You start to wonder, is this really a palace anymore, or a gilded tomb? At midnight, a physician checks the king's pulse. Not because it's urgent, but because no one's sure he's still alive. He is. Barely. His skin is flushed and hot. A sheen of sweat beads across his temples. His breathing wheezes in and out like a bellows running out of air. And yet, when a servant brings forward another platter, this time roasted partridge with dates and spiced wine, Henry opens one eye and grunts in approval. The appetite lives on. You, however, might skip dinner. Morning again, though you'd never know it. The chambers are cloaked in the same amber candlelight as always. Sunlight doesn't dare poke through these curtains anymore. It wouldn't make much difference if it did. The room smells of wax and rot, something vaguely metallic, like rusted armor left too long in the rain. Today the royal physicians have returned, this time with something new. A theory. They huddle near the foot of the bed, robes brushing the flagstones, voices pitched low but urgent. You lean closer. The word humours is mentioned again. So is imbalanced bile. Someone mutters something about miasmas. Another blames the moon, and one, perhaps the boldest of them, whispers about demons. You raise an eyebrow. But here in 1546, even among scholars, it's not entirely out of place. Disease, after all, is often seen as moral punishment. If the king is suffering, well, it must be because he's guilty of something. And Henry is guilty of a great many things. They eventually settle on a treatment. Not a cure, of course, that's too optimistic. Just something to ease the vapors. A mix of honey, herbs, and crushed pearls is spooned into his slack mouth. Most of it dribbles back out. To counter the ill airs, someone brings out perfumed pomanders, balls of waxy resin stuffed with clove, rose petals, and ambergris. They're meant to purify the room. What they actually do is compete aggressively with the scent of rotting leg ulcers. It's like hosting a tea party in a bog. You move a little closer to the bed. The curtains are partly drawn, revealing a shocking glimpse of the bandaged limbs beneath. His legs, if you can still call them that, are red, cracked, and swollen to twice their natural size. The skin is shiny in places, raw in others. You quickly look away. That's when you notice the courtiers. They're not standing tall anymore. They slouch a little. They whisper more. The air is less reverent, more resigned. One man stifles a yawn. Another discreetly checks a scrap of parchment tucked in his sleeve. Probably an update from a friend in Parliament, or a prayer, or both. And still, the king clings on. He mumbles through cracked lips, asking for Catherine. Not any Catherine specifically, he's had 3. Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish queen he divorced. Catherine Howard, the teenage bride he had executed. Or perhaps Catherine Parr, the current one, who, to her credit, is still here. Sort of. You hear footsteps outside the chamber, deliberate and light. A figure steps in, Queen Catherine Parr, dressed in deep green and fur, the picture of composed dignity. Her expression is unreadable. She curtsies, then walks to the king's side, taking his hand gently. He doesn't react. She begins to read aloud, softly. It's scripture, but with poetry in the cadence. Psalms, maybe. Her voice is like balm against the tense air. Even you feel yourself settle, just slightly. For a moment, the room becomes still, but only for a moment. Because behind her, unnoticed by all but you, the fire sputters. The shadows twitch, and you swear you hear something. Barely a whisper, like laughter or crying, or both. The king flinches. His eyes snap open. Anne? He croaks. again. Catherine Parr pauses but doesn't correct him. Smart woman. Historians still argue whether Henry's constant references to his dead wives were signs of madness, guilt, or divine reckoning. Some say he feared judgment from the women he'd wronged. Others believe he simply couldn't distinguish past from present anymore. All agree, though, that Anne Boleyn's name came up far too often for comfort. And so Queen Catherine reads. The king twitches. The physicians hover. The fire crackles. You sit quietly in the corner, watching the last vestiges of royal dignity leak slowly into the stone floor. Then, from across the room, a physician lets slip a quiet but fateful phrase. We should prepare for decline. It's said without emotion, like noting the weather. The courtiers don't react, but you see it ripple through the chamber like a silent tremor. Someone closes a book. Someone else picks at their fingernails. One man quietly tightens the buckle on his shoe. The king farts. Loudly. The moment shatters. You bite your tongue to avoid laughing. Not because it's funny, okay it is, but because here, even a bodily noise is a political act. No one acknowledges it. The queen reads louder. By evening, Henry has slipped back into a doze. A servant brings him a bowl of sugared prunes and places it gently by the bedside. Another fans away the smoke from the perfumed braziers. And in a forgotten alcove of the chamber, a mouse darts out, grabs a crumb of bread, and scurries back into the stonework. Even royalty cannot escape decay. The next day bleeds in without ceremony. You're still here, in the same padded chair, boots barely touching the floor, and by now you've memorized the pattern of the stone tiles. A thin layer of ash has settled near the fireplace, undisturbed. No one moves fast in this room. Even time drags its feet. The king, however, is wide awake. At least his eyes are open. He's muttering again. Names, mostly. Some familiar. Cromwell, Wolsey, More. Others less so. You strain to hear. George. Norris. Weston. You blink. That's Anne Boleyn's brother. Her alleged lovers. All executed years ago in a flurry of trumped-up charges and very public beheadings. And here they are again, resurrected in the royal memory, walking around the bed like ghosts in court dress. You begin to wonder if the king dreams only in trials now. Endless circular hearings with no verdict but blood. He groans and gestures toward the ceiling. They stare, he whispers. Everyone in the room pauses. One servant fumbles a candle, another looks up, half expecting to see eyes blinking down from the plaster. They don't, not visibly anyway. But the king is convinced. His fat, ringed finger jabs toward the ornate canopy above him. She's there. A pause. All of them. And then, almost petulantly, they were not guilty. Well, that's new. Historians still argue whether Henry truly believed the accusations he leveled at his wives and ministers, or whether he simply believed in convenience. This sudden revision, spoken through cracked lips and fading breath, is either a flicker of conscience, or just another fever talking. Still, the room takes note. Later that afternoon, a court artist visits. Not for a portrait. No one paints a dying king. He's here to remove one. Specifically, a mural hung just outside the chambers, depicting Henry as a virile, armor-clad god king. The image is nearly 20 years old, but now it feels like a joke. Quietly, a decision has been made to take it down. Replace it, perhaps, with something more contemplative. You watch as the artist lifts his brush and begins painting over the image. The eyes go first. Always the eyes. Meanwhile, inside the room, Henry is reliving something. His lips curl into a snarl. His hands claw at the velvet coverlet. You swore loyalty. He growls to no one. A physician murmurs something about delirium. A courtier crosses himself. You just watch. It's a strange thing watching a man with absolute power disintegrate. Physically, mentally, emotionally. Even stranger when the man in question knows it. Henry, for all his ego, was never stupid. He knows what death looks like. He's orchestrated plenty of them. He just never imagined it would smell like this. The leg ulcers, yes, still there, have reached a new level of repulsiveness. The bandages are soaked through faster now, and the fluid smells sharper, more acrid. One of the attendants discreetly opens a window. Another rubs a scented cloth beneath his nose. You almost feel bad for them. Almost. Because this isn't just tending to a patient. This is theater. Ritual. Pretending everything is still under control when it very much isn't. You glance across the room and notice something odd. A large fur-lined cloak draped over a chair. Henry hasn't walked in months, yet the cloak is there, as if he might leap from bed and go hawking by sundown. A joke. A ghost of routine. Then, the dog returns. The same hound you heard the other night. Its howl echoes up from the garden again, mournful and low. The queen flinches. The chamberlain frowns. The king? He smiles. They're calling me, he says. Then quieter. I'm not ready. No one speaks. Dinner is a sad affair. A custard tart is brought in, untouched. A servant arranges soft bread with herbs on a silver tray. The king waves it away. Appetite at last is slipping. Instead, he demands music. A small group of lute players arrives, nerves jangling louder than the strings. They begin a soft madrigal, something melancholic, almost childlike. You don't recognize the tune. Henry does. His eyelids droop and for a while the rage fades. He hums. The entire room seems to exhale. This is the closest he's come to peace in days. The music fades, the players retreat. The silence returns, thicker now. As the fire pops and the wind hisses against the windows, the king stares at the ceiling again. They're still watching, he murmurs. You glance up just to be sure, still no eyes. But even you can't deny the room feels crowded. Dawn breaks in streaks of pewter and cream, but the only light inside the king's chamber is firelight. Always firelight. It casts a flicker across Henry's pallid face, which now seems sunken, like clay left too long in the rain. Today, the court is tense. The king's condition has dipped, not dramatically, but noticeably. He's speaking less, sleeping more. And when he does wake, it's often in confusion, disorientation, or fury. But mostly he sleeps, until now. A groan rumbles from beneath the coverlets, followed by a wet cough that leaves a faint red smear on his pillow. You don't need a physician to tell you what that means. And yet, despite all this, Henry remains obsessed with one thing: war. His advisors tiptoe in with documents about military funding. There's talk of France, always France. The king insists on reading troop numbers, although he can barely hold the parchment. His hand shakes. He demands to know the condition of the cannons at Calais. A servant reads the figures aloud. Henry nods, mutters, "More iron, less wool." No one argues. Then, quite suddenly, he sits upright, a feat no one thought possible anymore, and yells, "Fire the culverins!" Everyone startles. The king slumps back just as fast, wheezing, as if the command cost him a year of life. Which, honestly, it might have. Historians still argue whether Henry's late obsession with military matters was genuine strategy or simply delusion. Was he planning something? Or just reliving glories from younger, more mobile years? We'll never know. The plans never left the parchment. You, meanwhile, can't help but notice something strange. As he slips into another nap, the king begins to mouth words. You listen closely. They're not in English. They're Latin, maybe French, maybe both. It's an odd mix. Snatches of prayer, bursts of legalese, and one particularly odd phrase. Lupus in lecto. The wolf in the bed. You shiver. Later, an old general arrives, gray-bearded and stiff, dressed more for show than comfort. He's come to pay respects, though he'd never say it that way. Men like him prefer terms like report or briefing. Henry doesn't stir. The general bows, turns to leave, then pauses. "Tell him," he mutters under his breath, to no one in particular, "we still keep the flags dry." You write that one down in your mind. You're not sure why. The rest of the day is dominated by smells. Unpleasant ones. The leg ulcers have reached a point where even the most perfumed towels can't mask them. When the bandages are changed twice today, you hear a sound you will never forget. A kind of hissing, bubbling squelch, like stew left boiling too long. One of the younger servants vomits quietly into a bucket. He is replaced immediately. The king notices none of this. Or if he does, he's past caring. Instead, he clutches a scrap of cloth in his hand. Not royal silk, not brocade. It's lace. Delicate, feminine. Probably a cuff or a part of a dress hem. He holds it like a talisman. You can guess whose it was. Anne again? Jane? Someone lost. It's hard to say whether the lace survived the years or if it's something he conjured up from scraps and guilt. Either way, he refuses to let it go. By mid-afternoon, a strange peace descends. No yelling, no commands. Just labored breath and the slow crackle of the hearth. You take a moment to look at the room. Really look. The embroidered tapestries hang a little crooked now. Dust clings to the corners of the crown molding. The fire guard is rusted. The velvet chair closest to the bed sags slightly. Too many weary visitors. Even the opulence has grown tired. Outside in the hallway, two nobles argue in whispers. Something about the succession. Edward is the named heir, of course, but he's only 9. Too young to rule. Too fragile to fight. The real war is already beginning, and Henry's not even cold yet. But that's tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you return to your chair, watching the king twitch and sweat and mutter about gunpowder. A storm rolls over London, distant thunder rumbling like distant drums. And Henry sleeps on, dreaming of cannons. The next time Henry opens his eyes, something is different. It's subtle at first, just a quiet resignation in his gaze. Not fear, not confusion, just recognition. As if he's finally caught up with the rest of the world and realizes what everyone else has known for weeks. He's not getting out of this bed. Not ever. Queen Catherine Parr is beside him again, holding a book. Not scripture this time. It's poetry. Lines from Chaucer, perhaps, or maybe something even older. Her voice is soft, the cadence steady. The courtiers pretend not to listen, but you see their shoulders ease ever so slightly. Everyone wants something gentle. The king shifts. He turns to face her and whispers, "You read like her." She doesn't ask who, she knows better. Catherine Parr nods, closes the book, and brushes a hand over his fingers. Just for a moment. Then she gets up and leaves the room. She won't return today. Behind her, you see the flicker of movement. Servants bringing in fresh linens, scented cloths, and another tray of broth the king won't touch. Someone sprinkles rosemary along the threshold. It's not decoration. It's tradition. A ward against death. And yet, death is practically lounging in the corner now, swirling wine in a goblet, waiting for a better punchline. The king hasn't eaten anything solid in over a day. His hands tremble. His breath comes in strange rhythms. Sometimes rapid, sometimes barely there. But every so often, he wakes just long enough to demand something absurd. Today, falconry. He wants his old bird, a peregrine named Crimson. She died years ago. Of course he's told this gently, and of course he ignores it. "Bring her," he rasps. "She knows the skies." You're not sure if he means hunting or heaven. Historians still argue whether Henry's final requests were lucid attempts to connect with comforting memories or signs of full mental decline. His fixation on animals, childhood games, and People Long Gone reads like a patchwork of a man unraveling and trying to stitch himself back together with ghosts. Then again, it could just be nostalgia. That afternoon, the royal tailor is summoned. Not for new clothes, for the burial robe. They bring it out of storage. Deep purple, lined with ermine, stitched with gold thread and Tudor roses. It's heavy enough to weigh down a coffin lid. No one says a word, but everyone watches as the tailor smooths out the folds and adjusts the sleeves. Just in case. You glance back at the bed. The king has fallen asleep again, his mouth slightly open. A string of drool snakes down his chin. His crown sits on a low table nearby, forgotten. And then, unexpectedly, he speaks. No one's near enough to hear it clearly, except you. A single word. Forgive. That's all. You want to believe it's a moment of clarity. A final reckoning. But then he follows it with, burn the maps. And you realize clarity may be too generous a word. Still, the court scribes dutifully record his every utterance, just in case one turns out to be profound. Or prophetic. That's what you do when a king is dying. You collect every sound like it might be the next Magna Carta. Outside the windows, the storm has passed. A golden dusk settles over the palace. It's almost beautiful. Inside, the king shifts, groans, and suddenly shouts, "Light the cannons!" Again, you sigh. The outburst draws in his physicians, one of whom suggests applying fresh leeches to balance the temperament. Another proposes crushed pearls and milk. You suspect these men would try sprinkling duck feathers and whistling madrigals if it bought them 5 more minutes of royal favor. So they settle for leeches. Out comes the jar. In go the little suckers, right onto the king's already battered arms. To be fair, it could be worse. Earlier that week, someone suggested trepanning. As the doctors hover, the king rouses again. This time, he's calmer. He opens one bloodshot eye, scans the room, and says something that silences everyone. Tell Edward to listen to no one. Not even God. Then he laughs. It's dry, cracked, and a little mad. You don't laugh with him, because you realize something chilling. He might be serious. Henry VIII, the man who once broke Christendom to secure a divorce, is now advising his 9-year-old heir to trust no higher power. That's not just defiance, that's legacy. The sun dips below the horizon. Candles are lit again. The crown is gently polished by a footman, then replaced on its velvet stand. No one talks about tomorrow. Not yet. But everyone here knows it's getting closer. You wake, or at least shift, to the sound of slippers on stone. The kind of hush that only happens when men of status don't want to be noticed. They're back. The Privy Chamber. Henry's most trusted advisors, though the term trusted is doing a lot of work lately. These aren't flamboyant nobles in feathered hats. These are the close ones, the quiet ones. The ones who know exactly how many steps it takes to get from the king's bed to the closet where the real documents are kept. They file in one by one. Sir Anthony Denny, tall and unreadable. William Paget, whispering something behind a gloved hand. Thomas Wriothesley, already fiddling with a velvet pouch that probably contains something important. They don't bow, not properly. It's too early for ceremony. Too late for pretense. The king is asleep, and yet, somehow, he knows. He stirs as if sensing the scent of intrigue in the room. His lips twitch. A breath catches. You think you hear him say, "Be honest for once." But no one answers. The men take seats around a small table on the edge of the chamber, just out of earshot. Or so they think. You inch closer. What they're discussing isn't medicine or prayer, it's paperwork. Specifically, the royal succession, the future council, the terms of a will that's still in flux. The crown will go to Edward, of course, that's settled. But who rules through him? That's the question everyone's circling like cats around a soup bowl. Paget wants balance. Denny prefers decisiveness. Wriothesley wants Wriothesley. They talk in code. The boy must be shielded. Religious moderation. We cannot repeat what happened with the Seymours. You're impressed by how quickly they can say absolutely nothing. And still, all this is happening with the king not 20 feet away, festering, feverish, and intermittently whispering Latin to the ceiling. At one point he murmurs, "The serpent has 2 heads." You don't know who he means. Maybe they do. They stop talking for a moment, just long enough to exchange glances. Historians still argue over the events of this day, whether the final revisions to Henry's will were dictated by a conscious king or constructed entirely by the Privy Council. Some say he signed the last draft in a moment of clarity. Others claim his signature was stamped, not penned, by trembling hands he could no longer control. Either way, the ink is dry. By noon, one of the clerks enters the room with a fresh copy. Not a scrap or a scroll, but a book, bound in stiff leather too thick to carry without both hands. Inside, names are written, titles rearranged, fortunes created or erased in loops of ink. The king? Asleep again, or pretending. Because when Denny bends over the bed to whisper an update, Henry's eyes flick open. Only for a second. But they meet Denny's, and you see something pass between them. Something that smells more like warning than consent. Then it's gone. The rest of the day stretches out like tired cloth. Henry drifts in and out of sleep. The courtiers come and go, each visit shorter than the last. Some carry books, others bring coins, tokens from the king's old hunting days, gifts, tiny relics of favor they hope to keep. No one asks how he's feeling anymore. That evening, the candles are lit earlier than usual. The windows stay closed. A priest is summoned, though no one officially calls it last rites. Just a precaution. The priest mumbles prayers in Latin, each syllable landing with the weight of routine rather than hope. You've heard these words before. They rarely change. Like the script of a play that's been running far too long. At one point, the priest flubs a line. No one corrects him. Even God, it seems, has started dozing off. The king sighs. Not in pain, not in pleasure. Just weariness. He's like a tapestry fading in the sun, his colors bleeding into one another. Nothing about him is sharp anymore, not the wit, not the voice, not the will. Even his once famous temper has dulled. A servant drops a jug. It shatters across the floor, shards spinning underfoot. Henry does not shout. He doesn't even blink. You wonder if he noticed. At midnight, the privy chamber files out one by one. The documents are sealed. The rolls are cast. The throne is still warm, but the next act has already begun. And the king? He sleeps with one hand resting on his chest and the other curled around that strange bit of lace. You're beginning to think it's not from a wife. Maybe it belonged to a child. Or maybe it's just a scrap from a dream he can't let go. By the next morning, the court has entered a peculiar rhythm. The rhythm of waiting for someone to die. It's a strange kind of silence, not solemn, not sacred, just tired, as if even the walls have grown bored of pretending everything is fine. The king, meanwhile, is sweating through his bedding again. Servants come with new linens. They change them carefully, lifting each limb like it's made of glass and secrets. The bandages are now replaced without comment. No one flinches at the smell. No one recoils from the pus. This is simply what Henry is now. A giant, melting candle of a man, dripping toward his end. But there's still time for one more miracle of bad medicine. Today's attempt at salvation. Leeches, again. But not just any leeches. Hungarian swamp leeches imported at great expense and rumored to extract death itself from the blood. You watch as they are placed along the king's arms and legs, small, glistening, and disturbingly enthusiastic. One of them pops off early, engorged. The court physician beams. It means the illness is drawing near the surface, he says proudly. You resist the urge to ask if he's treating a king or brewing soup. The king groans in response, though whether from pain or boredom no one can say. His eyes flutter open. He focuses on something above the bed and mutters, "Get it down. It watches." You glance up. Nothing but the tapestry of St. George slaying the dragon. The colors have faded over the years. The dragon looks more sleepy than slain. Still, Henry keeps staring. His lips twitch into a whisper. It lies. Historians still argue over moments like this. Did Henry genuinely see things? Was his mind unraveling under the strain of disease, regret, and too much meat? Or were these statements simply dramatics? His way of making even dying feel like a royal performance? One scholar once noted, Henry VIII could not resist being the center of a room, even when unconscious. Fitting. Later that day, two physicians get into a minor argument near the fire. One insists the king must be bled further, perhaps from the feet this time. The other counters that it's too dangerous. His humours are already unstable, his phlegm lacking serenity. You suspect they're making this up as they go. But then again, most 16th century medicine was just dramatic guesswork with Latin vocabulary. They settle on a compromise. Lavender water, spoonfuls of it. For the nerves. The king swats the spoon away. Water is for the dead, he says. By now, even you have lost track of which ghost is haunting whom. Is the king haunted by Anne, Jane, Catherine, his former friends, his murdered ministers? Or are they the ones haunted by him? Somewhere in the background, a clerk is compiling lists. Names of nobles to be summoned. Those to be sent home. Rewards to be distributed. A few debts to be quietly erased. The king's body may not be cold yet, but the kingdom is already being rearranged. And amid this shuffle, the queen reappears. Catherine Parr enters wearing a robe of midnight blue. No jewelry, no entourage. Just her and a single book tucked beneath her arm. She walks straight to the bed and sits. "I'll read," she says simply. She opens the book, not scripture this time, but philosophy. Erasmus, you think. She begins slowly, the cadence like rainfall on a roof. And something shifts. Henry listens. For 10 full minutes, he does not interrupt, does not groan, does not fall asleep. Just listens. Then he speaks. Softly, roughly. "You were kind." Catherine pauses. She closes the book, carefully, reverently. Then she replies without looking at him. "I loved what you could have been." The words hang there, suspended between them. Heavy, human. No one moves. And then she's gone again. She doesn't say goodbye. Queens don't need to. The room feels emptier now. The fire has burned low. Shadows crawl across the stone floor. Somewhere nearby, a maid begins to cry softly, stopped only when a stern-faced noble shoots her a look. There will be time to cry later. There's always time for mourning, but not just yet. Outside, the wind picks up. A storm is returning. Inside, the king sleeps again, mumbling about battles, wolves, and a place called Silken Heath, which may or may not exist. The leeches are gone, the fire is almost out, and Death, once lounging in the corner, has now taken a chair by the bedside. You don't speak, you just watch. The wind howls down the chimneys of Whitehall like a song, half remembered. Somewhere along the roofline, a shutter slaps once, then again, before a servant hurries to silence it. Inside the king's chamber, the atmosphere has curdled from tense to brittle. People no longer whisper, they just don't speak. Henry has entered the in-between. Not quite conscious, not quite unconscious. His mouth moves, but not in language. His hands twitch, but not with purpose. He stares blankly at nothing, and yet everyone around him behaves as if he could snap back at any moment and demand the head of whoever allowed the fireplace to sputter. But he doesn't. The fire is dying. And so is the man. You shift in your chair again, now instinctively avoiding the squeaky board beneath your foot. Even your breaths have slowed. It's the kind of stillness that seems to thicken the air. Suddenly, without warning, Henry's eyes flick open. Sharp, alert, almost lucid. Everyone freezes. He looks around the room at the faces watching him, the velvet curtains, the golden bowl of untouched custards, the candlelight bouncing off the polished edge of his crown. Then, in a voice more gravel than man, he says, "Who poisons me?" Not is someone poisoning me, but who? A physician immediately kneels, swearing allegiance, love, and a complete absence of poison. Another tries to offer water. Henry bats it away. He turns his gaze to a nearby courtier, eyes narrowed. "You stared too long," he whispers. The man looks ready to melt. Historians still argue whether Henry believed he was being poisoned in his final days, or whether it was simply the mind grasping for meaning as it unraveled. There were rumors, of course. There are always rumors. A bitter cup, a jealous wife, a reformist bishop. But nothing ever confirmed, nothing ever punished. Henry himself had survived actual poisoning attempts earlier in life. He never forgot. And now, with every muscle aching and every bite tasting of ash, he's sure someone's finishing the job. Even though his own body is doing that just fine on its own. The outburst subsides. He breathes heavily, slips back beneath the fever, and mumbles something about hawks again. This time it's not crimson he wants, it's the white one. No one knows what he means. A moment later, a new sound enters the chamber. A soft knock, then another. Everyone looks toward the door. No one moves. Then Sir Anthony Denny steps forward and opens it slightly. A shadowy figure enters, hooded, robed, and almost ghost-like in their step. The royal confessor. You've seen him before, but rarely this close. He carries no books, no incense, just presence. He walks to the bed and kneels, folding his hands. His voice is low, a hum against the fire's crackle. "Majesty," he begins, "shall we speak of peace?" The king grunts. The confessor continues, unbothered. He offers gentle questions about sin, salvation, the soul. Henry answers only with grunts, eye twitches, and eventually a single word. Later. And just like that, the man of God is dismissed. The confessor bows and leaves, face unreadable. A few courtiers look uneasy, others relieved. One, clearly superstitious, touches a wooden chair leg and mutters a prayer beneath his breath. Not for the king, but for himself. The afternoon drags on. Food is brought and removed, untouched. A servant refills a decanter of red wine out of habit, then hesitates, unsure whether it's appropriate anymore. He leaves it anyway. Henry hasn't spoken since the poisoning accusation. Hasn't moved much either, until sunset. As the light slants through a break in the clouds, painting the stone walls gold for just a moment, Henry stirs. He opens his eyes, stares into the golden haze, and says, "Tell them I did my best." It's unclear who he means. His children, his wives, the bishops, the ghosts, maybe even himself. Then he frowns. His brow furrows. "No, not best. I did what I had to." A pause. "They will lie about me." And then quiet again. You feel that in your chest. Because whether you love him or loathe him, Henry VIII is not a man easily forgotten. And he knows it. He knows the scribes will write. The poets will revise. The painters will soften his chin. The rumors will outlive his children. And that's what bothers him most. Not the pain, not the end, but the edit. The fire finally dies out. And still, no one moves. Night has settled fully now. The kind of deep, inky stillness that seems to press against the windows like a second wall. London, beyond the palace, is quiet. The Thames glistens black. Even the dogs seem to sense it. No howling tonight. Inside Henry's chamber, the fire has been reluctantly rebuilt with a few fresh logs. Not for warmth, but ceremony. Always ceremony. The king has not spoken in hours. A bowl of broth sits cooling on the bedside table. Beside it, a cloth-wrapped bottle of cordial, untouched. Someone still believes he might sip it. Someone still believes in endings with dignity. You glance at Henry. His chest rises and falls in staccato rhythm. each breath a small rebellion. The gap between them grows longer. His crown has been moved, not far, just from its velvet cushion to a polished wooden shelf, but the gesture is enough to make a few eyebrows rise. Moving a monarch's crown before his death is a calculated risk. But then again, so is keeping it close. It's never just a crown, it's an answer to a question no one is brave enough to ask out loud. Henry stirs, faintly. He shifts under the blankets, mouth moving like he's chewing on something. An old argument, perhaps. Then, quite clearly, Thomas. A name with consequences. But which Thomas? He's had several, each rising, falling, or losing their heads depending on the mood of the day. Thomas More? Beheaded. Thomas Cromwell? Also beheaded. Thomas Wolsey? Died in disgrace. Thomas Seymour still alive? For now. He doesn't clarify, just mutters again. He lied. Historians still argue whether these late mutterings were judgments, regrets, or simply fragmented thoughts floating to the surface. Some say Henry died full of remorse. Others say he went to his grave convinced of his righteousness. What you know is this. His tone isn't angry. It's puzzled. Like a man trying to finish a story he once told confidently and now barely remembers. Outside of the storm returns. Rain begins tapping against the stained glass. It's a slow, methodical rhythm, like fingers drumming on a desk during a sermon. One of the candles flickers out. No one replaces it. Near the wall, a noble shifts uncomfortably. You recognize him, Sir William Herbert. He's here on behalf of the council, but also on behalf of himself. Everyone in this room is watching history and wondering what version of it will mention their name. You look at Henry again. He's trying to raise his hand. The motion is pitiful, barely lifting above his chest, but his eyes are open and they're staring at the ceiling again. He says, "Do not let them put me with her." No one dares ask who he means. Anne? Catherine Howard? Jane? He never clarifies. The wind howls once and then dies, as if exhausted. One of the physicians, a younger man who still believes in his own relevance, takes Henry's pulse. Frowns. Takes it again. Then quietly excuses himself. No announcement. No panic. Just a ripple of acknowledgement that something has shifted. The Queen does not return tonight. She has retired to her own chambers. The final stretch of a royal death is a delicate thing. Too much presence is as suspicious as too little. Catherine Parr has done her part. Read the books, offered the silence, endured the stares. Now she waits elsewhere. Henry exhales a long, wheezing breath that feels like punctuation. You're not sure if it's the end of a sentence or the end of a reign. Then, shockingly, his eyes open wide. He looks straight ahead, lips parting in a tiny gasp. He says, barely a whisper, "She is here." You scan the room, no one. But Henry smiles, faintly. It's not the smile of victory, not the smirk of old arrogance. It's something softer, resigned, human. He closes his eyes again. You realize then he's ready. And yet, he lingers. The court holds its breath. Even the fire holds its flicker. But death takes its time. The hours pass like molasses, thick and slow, sticking to the edges of time. You've stopped counting candles. You've stopped watching the windows for signs of dawn. Now you simply wait. Henry hasn't spoken since the "she is here" moment. That whisper still echoes in your head. It haunts the chamber in a different way than his usual muttering. Less fever, more acceptance. And then, just when you think the room might finally settle into stillness, a door creaks open. A bishop enters. Robed, serious, face carved from stone. He smells faintly of incense and damp wool. Behind him comes a single boy acolyte carrying a gilded book that seems much too heavy for his size. They've come for the king's soul, or at least what's left of it. The bishop nods at the gathered few. The court parts. He approaches the bedside, bows his head. The boy kneels beside him, opening the book to a page already creased with overuse. "Majesty," the bishop says gently, "shall we speak of your maker?" Henry doesn't respond. Not with words, but his fingers twitch. Once, twice, just enough for the bishop to take it as consent. That's all he needs. And so it begins. The prayer is slow, rhythmic, like waves on a lake. The Latin flows through the chamber, not demanding, not pleading, just existing. Soft consonants, long vowels, a cadence meant for final crossings. Even the boy's voice steadies, finding a note just above a whisper. Henry's lips don't move, but his eyes open again, briefly, and you catch a flicker of something. Not terror, not regret, just tiredness. He blinks once and the bishop closes the book. Now comes the harder part. The bishop leans in, almost nose to nose with the king, and says the thing no one else has had the nerve to say. "Your Majesty, do you repent of your sins?" Silence. And then, so faint you almost miss it, Henry exhales, a sound shaped like the word, "if I must." You feel a ripple move through the room like a ghost brushing past your skin. The bishop pauses. His eyes flick sideways, then back to the king. He doesn't press the point. Historians still argue whether Henry VIII ever repented, whether he made peace with the church he split, or whether he died exactly as he lived, half in, half out, sword in one hand, law book in the other. Some claim he received the final sacrament. Others say he refused it with a grunt and a sneer. There's no record from the man himself. Just echoes. The bishop finishes the rite. The boy closes the book with a soft thud. They both bow and withdraw, like shadows peeling off the wall. The door closes behind them with a soft click. The room feels heavier now, as if the last stitch holding Henry to this world has loosened. One of the courtiers clears his throat. Another begins to quietly wipe the king's forehead with a scented cloth. Someone else approaches with a goblet, still trying, still pretending. But Henry does not drink. Instead, he does something peculiar. He hums. Just a few notes, out of tune, barely audible. But you recognize the rhythm. It's an old English song. One of those pastoral melodies from childhood, probably something he learned in the nursery at Eltham Palace, long before the crowns, the break from Rome, the beheadings. It's a lullaby, and he's singing it to himself. It lasts less than 10 seconds, and then it's gone. The room stands utterly still, as if even the fire has gone silent out of respect. Then, finally, Sir Anthony Denny steps forward again. He walks slowly to the bed, kneels beside it, and says softly, clearly, and for all to hear, "Majesty, it is time to prepare." Henry doesn't move. Then he blinks once, and impossibly chuckles. "Prepare?" he wheezes. "For what? Another wife?" You can't help it. You smile. So do two of the younger servants. One coughs to hide it. Henry blinks again. The joke cost him energy he doesn't have. His chest rises with effort. His mouth opens, closes, opens again. But no more words come. Denny bows his head and remains kneeling. The room smells of wood smoke, cloves, and something older. Something decaying. Someone opens a window just a crack. Cold air enters. Henry doesn't shiver. Morning again? Maybe. You've lost track. The outside world seems like a distant myth now. Sunrises, bells, the scent of dew on grass. Here it's candlelight and hushes. Here it's the sound of a dying man exhaling in irregular patterns. Henry hasn't spoken since the joke. He hasn't laughed again either, but he is still here. Sort of. His body lies sunken in the bed like a dent in old dough, barely rising with breath. One arm lies outside the covers, mottled and still. His mouth is slightly ajar. The only sign he's still alive is the subtle twitch of one eyelid, and even that comes and goes like a candle flicker. The room is fuller today. More men. More titles. More documents. It's time for the will. The real one. The final one. The one that will outlast the man whose hand once signed it, if he even signed it at all. That's the controversy now. The debate begins quietly in a far corner of the room where a table has been cleared and quills sharpened. 3 men sit. 1 scribes, 1 watches, 1 waits. Denny is already there. Paget, too. And a few others of notable name but forgettable face. They unfold a thick parchment scroll and begin reading aloud in tones just above a whisper. It's a strange ritual. This act of reciting a living man's last instructions within earshot of his still breathing body. Morbid, yes, but practical. Henry made certain of it. The scroll names Edward as heir. That part isn't surprising. But what follows is a list. Names of men who will serve as executors, guardians, and manipulators of the realm. 10 of them. Then 12. Then back to 10. The list seems to shift every time the king falls asleep. You listen as names are repeated and scratched out. Seymour, Hertford, Wriothesley, Cranmer. Some you know will survive the storm. Others, you sense will not. Henry stirs. The table falls silent. All heads turn toward the bed. He mutters a name. Reginald. A moment of stillness, then panic. Reginald Pole? A Catholic cardinal? A Plantagenet? A man Henry accused of treason more than once. A man who'd once stood as a symbol of everything Henry claimed to hate. Was he forgiving him? Was it a warning? Or was he simply dreaming? Historians still argue whether that name was ever truly uttered, or whether it was fabricated by later scribes trying to tie the Tudor knot with one last poetic twist. But in this room, at this hour, you saw the lips move. And it wasn't nonsense. It was deliberate. The scribes don't write it down. The will is folded, sealed, and marked with a great red stamp. Not Henry's hand, of course. His grip isn't strong enough. Instead, they press a wooden stamp carved with his signature. It thuds against the parchment with a dull finality. That's it. The future etched in ink and doubt. Meanwhile, the king grows stiller. His face has collapsed in on itself. The proud Tudor jaw now slack and sunken. His lips dry and cracked. His tongue barely visible. He does not look like a monarch. He looks like an overstuffed portrait left out in the rain. But here's the strange part. No one dares leave. The men who just rearranged an empire still stand rooted in place, unwilling to turn their backs. As though the act of dying might reverse if they stop watching. As though Henry might sit up and bellow, "You fools, not Cranmer!" And honestly, you half expect it. But he doesn't. Instead, the Queen's lady-in-waiting enters quietly with a single candle and places it on the sill. A sign. Not to the living, but to the watchers outside. The messengers, the guards, the runners. When the candle goes out, they'll know. They're preparing. And still, the king remains. A physician returns to check his breath. Puts a mirror to his lips. Watches for fog. There's still some. Barely. Then the physician leans down and murmurs something in the king's ear. You catch only the last few words. May your crown be light and your burdens forgotten. You think if Henry could hear it, he might scoff at the sentiment. Or maybe after all this, he'd accept it. Not with grace, but with weary gratitude. The candle on the sill flickers. But it does not go out. Not yet. The walls feel closer now. Not literally, they're still lined with thick tapestries and buttressed with centuries of stone. But somehow the room itself seems to be shrinking around the bed. Around the man. Around the crown that's no longer on his head. Henry is almost gone. And still, the rituals continue. You see it in the way the chamberlain lays out fresh robes for no one to wear. In how a servant gently folds the corner of the bedsheet one last time, just to look busy. In the way a page boy stands at the door, unmoving, like a chess piece waiting for a board that's been packed away. The king hasn't opened his eyes in half a day. His breaths are so shallow you find yourself leaning forward to hear them. You're not the only one. Even the fire seems quieter. Courtiers whisper with heads tilted, like they're listening for rain against stone. Then, unexpectedly, he moves. Just his hand. Slowly, as if lifting something impossibly heavy, it rises from the coverlet, trembles, hovers, and then lowers again. You hear the faintest sound, a thud. Not from the hand, but from the goblet beside the bed, which he's failed to reach. Even now he wants one more sip, but his fingers no longer listen. A courtier rushes forward, lifting the cup to his lips. It's ceremonial now, a gesture. He doesn't drink. His mouth barely opens. The liquid trickles back into the cup, untouched. Still, everyone pretends. It's easier than admitting what they already know. You watch as his expression changes. Just a twitch of the brow, a faint grimace. Maybe pain. Maybe memory. You've come to recognize that look. It's what Henry wears when he's remembering, and you can guess where his mind goes now. To jousting fields where he once thundered down the lane, young and golden and dangerous. To feast halls roaring with music, his voice above them all. To the moment he looked a pope in the eye from several hundred miles away and said, "I am the church now." And then, to the scaffold. Anne, Catherine, Thomas More, Cromwell, Wolsey, Norris, Fisher. A list longer than memory, shorter than justice. They are all present now in this room, crowding the corners no one dares to look into. Henry sighs. A long, rattling thing. His head tilts just slightly toward the crown on the shelf. You think he sees it. Maybe he's imagining it on Edward's head. Or perhaps, more likely, he's trying to recall what it felt like on his own. The weight, the warmth, the way it dug into the scalp during long coronations. He says one word, heavy, and no one's sure what he means. The burden of kingship, the crown, his regrets, or maybe just the bed covers. Historians still argue whether Henry's final word was profound or mundane. Some claim he said monks, others swear it was Jane. One account suggests he said nothing at all, that he died with his mouth open, as if mid-command. But you were here. You heard heavy. A single tear slips from his right eye. It leaves a line through the sweat and dust on his cheek, cutting a path like a forgotten river. Then nothing. No movement, no sound, no air. The fire crackles. The goblet stands full. And Henry VIII, once supreme head of the Church of England, king of 500,000 souls, terror of Europe, lover of 6 wives, dissolver of monasteries, and patron of poets, is still. The room doesn't erupt in mourning. There are no wails, no screams. Just one long moment of held breath, and then a nod. Sir Anthony Denny steps forward, places 2 fingers gently on the king's neck, waits, then looks up and shakes his head. The page boy at the door slips away without a sound. Somewhere in the building, a bell will ring, but not yet. Not until the message passes through the right hands. Here, in this room, there's only silence. Except, of course, for the wind outside. It has picked up again, rattling the windows softly, like fingers tapping gently to say goodbye. There is a peculiar stillness to the moments just after a monarch dies. Not grief, not yet. Not relief, though perhaps that lingers unspoken. It's more like the entire room forgets what it was doing. Every person, every object, every breath suddenly recalibrates. The king is dead, which means everything changes. But first, stillness. You remain in your chair, not moving. The fire snaps once, casting light against Henry's unmoving face. He looks smaller now. The puffiness is still there, but the force that filled the air, the gravity of him, has lifted. Like a bell that stopped ringing. No one speaks, not even the birds. Eventually, Sir Anthony Denny stands. He doesn't look at the body. He doesn't need to. He walks to the shelf, takes down the crown, and places it gently into a velvet-lined case. He closes the lid with both hands. Slowly, deliberately. The sound of the latch clicking shut is the loudest thing in the room. Across the chamber, the servants begin to move. Not hurriedly, not lazily, just practiced. They've rehearsed this moment in their minds for weeks. Maybe longer. They begin undressing the room. One lifts the edge of a tapestry to check for mold. Another folds the king's outer robe and carries it away. A scribe rolls up a scroll from the bedside table, tucking it into his sleeve like it might evaporate if not hidden quickly. Henry's body is left untouched, for now. It is not yet time. Death in royal houses operates on a schedule. Sir William Paget opens the chamber door. Outside, a whisper travels fast. The candle on the sill is extinguished by a gentle hand. You can feel it, the shift in the palace's air. Somewhere down the corridor, a door slams shut. Another opens. You hear footsteps. Urgent, but hushed. Like hoofbeats muffled by snow. The body lies beneath a fine linen sheet, though you can still see the outline of his form. The curve of the stomach. The shape of his head. His arm rests stiffly to the side, fingers curled slightly inward, as if still clinging to something invisible. Perhaps power, perhaps regret. Perhaps nothing. Historians still argue over what came next. Some say Edward's council moved swiftly, declaring the boy king before the hour had turned. Others claim a full day passed before the news was public. But here, now, you see only uncertainty. Because in this chamber, though the king is dead, no one is truly in charge yet. And that's the most dangerous kind of quiet. A priest returns, this time with full regalia, not for last rites, but for something far more ancient, the death prayer of the sovereign. He places his hands on the king's chest, just above the linen, and begins to chant. The words are old, older than English, Latin mostly, a few phrases borrowed from French, maybe Greek. You recognize none of it, but you feel the weight. As the priest chants, 2 guards step into the room. Their armor clinks softly with each breath. They stand on either side of the bed, not for protection, but symbolism. The king is still watched, even now. The queen does not return. Neither do Henry's daughters. The boy, Edward, is likely still asleep in his chambers, surrounded by women tasked with preparing him for a crown that probably weighs more than he does. You wonder if he will be told gently, or coldly, or at all. The prayer ends. The priest steps back, and finally a physician approaches with gloves and a small brush. It is time for the next ritual. Not embalming, not yet. Just cleaning, straightening, preparing the body for what comes next. Which is travel, which is tomb, which is legend. A cloth is drawn over Henry's face. The room exhales. One of the servants, bold or foolish, says quietly, "He looks peaceful." Someone else replies dryly, "He looks dead." And that, you think, is finally true. Not bloated, not broken, not bleeding, just finished. You rise from your seat. Your legs ache, your shoulders are tight. You've been here for days, or maybe weeks. Or maybe it was only hours, and time just stretches when kings begin to die. You step back once, then twice. You look at the man-shaped mound beneath the linen, and you remember, this was Henry VIII, and now, it's not. The corridors of Whitehall are quieter now, not silent, but altered. Everything sounds as though it's coming through a thick velvet curtain. Footsteps are softer. Doors don't creak. Even the rain still pattering gently on the roof seems to hush itself out of respect. You walk slowly behind the procession of black-clad attendants. No announcements, no trumpets. This is the hidden hour of royal death, the interlude between breath and broadcast. Before the kingdom learns, before proclamations are nailed to doors, before coins are melted down and reminted with a child's face. Inside the death chamber, the body is being wrapped, not in haste but with care, Fine linens infused with myrrh and crushed herbs are layered over the king. One servant dabs a final time at the corners of his eyes, though they've already gone dull and dim. Another folds his hands across his chest. His signet ring has already been removed. Even in death, Henry has shrunk. Not just physically, but stature-wise. Without the voice, without the gaze, without the thunderous presence, he's just a man. A large, rotting man, admittedly. But a man. The guards stand motionless. The courtiers wait outside, and a single scribe in the far corner dips his quill and begins writing the entry that will be copied into every royal chronicle from Kent to York. On the 28th day of January in the year of our Lord 1547, His Majesty King Henry VIII passed from this world into judgment in his palace at Whitehall at the hour of... He pauses. No one's sure what time it was. The sun hadn't yet risen. The clocks had stopped ticking. Eventually he writes, "The early hours." It will do. They bring in the wooden casket, a simple thing for now, temporary. The final one will be grand, of course. Stone, sealed in ceremony and script. But for now, he is placed gently, if not gracefully, inside the wooden shell. A groan of old wood echoes through the chamber as the lid is pressed down. It doesn't quite fit. He's still too swollen. Someone fetches a mallet. You look away. Historians rarely write about this part, about how the body swelled, about how it burst, about the coffin leaking black fluids in the chapel 3 days later, soaking through the floor and seeping toward the tomb of Jane Seymour. Some say it was a sign of guilt, of rot, of divine disapproval. Others say wood warps. You prefer not to decide. Later, once the casket is sealed and draped in the royal standard, the procession begins. Slow, deliberate steps down the corridor, past the guards, past the portraits, past a life's worth of empire carved into every lintel and cornice. The king who built his own legend now leaves it behind, one shuffle, one solemn pace at a time. They carry him toward the chapel. The bells toll at last, low, long morning notes that ripple out across the city. Somewhere in a market, a butcher pauses mid-cut. In a nunnery, a young girl presses her fingers to her lips. In a cold room, the boy Edward is told. And you, still walking behind, watch as the casket turns the final corner toward the chapel doors. And for the first time, you notice it. The ceiling above the chapel has cracked. A hairline fracture barely visible, but real. Right above where the tomb is meant to rest. Later, long after Henry is buried, the ceiling will collapse. It will crush the altar, shatter a stained glass panel, spill royal dust onto the floor. The tomb will remain. But it will never be finished. No effigy, no grand statue, no soaring monument of marble and bronze. Just a slab, unmarked for a time. And beneath it, bones, cloth, and silence. You stand outside the chapel now as the doors close. The king is gone, and the realm waits. Not cheering, not mourning, just waiting, like lungs held before a breath. Because what follows a man like Henry VIII isn't just succession, it's judgment. But for now, let that weight lift from your shoulders. The echoes of the bells have faded now. The footsteps are distant. The torches have been lowered, and the embers burn soft behind glass doors. The casket rests beneath stone, and the crown is locked away in velvet and silence. The man who once split a continent, who ordered heads to fall with the flick of a ringed hand, is still. His legend, complicated and messy, will stretch on through books and songs and arguments. But for now, let it all quiet down. You've walked the final hours with him. Seen the fall, heard the whispers, breathed the smoke. And now, you rest. You close the door to the chamber in your mind. You let the hush fill the space where noise once lived. No need to weigh the history tonight. No need to pass judgment. Just drift. Float gently down the corridors of sleep, past tapestries and shadows until the world becomes softer, Slower, easier. There's no crown here. No sword, only stillness. And the knowledge that even in the loudest lives, the end is quiet. Very quiet.